Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for a very exciting conversation with Dr. Niobe Way that I've been looking forward to since you agreed to do this. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, we're very happy to have you here. So just for, introduction purposes, for those of you who are new to Cooper, who don't know me or the Cooper platform, my name is Erin O'Connor. I am a developmental psychologist. I'm also professor at New York University, where I head the early childhood program, and the chief of education here at Cooper, where our goal is really to provide information that's research-based and evidence-based on parenting and child development through talks like tonight with Dr. Way, and through virtual parenting groups, and through our Instagram. So that's who we are. And a brief introduction to Niobe, and then she'll tell a little bit more about herself and her work. But Dr. Niobe Way is a professor of developmental psychology and the founder of the Project for the Advancement of Our Common Humanity at New York University. She is also past president of the Society for Research on Adolescence and co-director of the Center for Research on Culture, Development, and Education at NYU. Her work focuses on the intersection of culture, context, and human development, with a particular focus on social and emotional development and how cultural ideologies influence developmental trajectories. Dr. Way has authored hundreds of journal articles and books, including Deep Secrets, Boys, Friendships, and the Crisis of Connection, the basis for the Oscar-nominated movie Close, and Everyday Courage, the lives and stories of urban teenagers. So thank you so much for joining us today and for all the work that you do.
Oh, thank you, Erin. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Well, it's a pleasure to be talking to you and, really thinking about your work and the work that you do that really focuses on the emotional lives of boys, but also just connection in general, right?
Yeah.
And of development and the role that connection plays. So can you talk a little bit more about, your work in this area?
Yeah. So I will tell you a little bit about, for people who are listening and or watching, about sort of how I got here, so people understand the context. So I got my doctorate in human development and psychology starting in the late 80s. I was at the Harvard Ed School, and I became fascinated by essentially friendships of boys. Starting when I was a doctoral student, I was volunteering as a school counselor as part of my training. And what I heard from a lot of boys, and these were boys from all different cultures and ethnicities and races, et cetera, talking a lot about their friendships and wanting deep connection with other boys. This is the late 80s. And I became fascinated by the disconnect between what I was learning in my adolescent development class at Harvard and my what I was hearing from boys. So I wasn't hearing in my adolescent development course anything at all about friendships, and certainly not boys' friendships. But also when I did hear about friendships, it was about peers and negative peer influence and peer pressure. It was never about the joys of being close with another person and the need for that. And but that's what the boys were talking about, wanting it, etc. And I really became fascinated by two questions. One was why we weren't teaching that, why we were not including that story in our stories of teenage development or adolescent development, but also why we weren't talking about it with boys in particular. And we didn't even think boys, and we still don't believe it, that boys need these kind of close friendships. So once I got my doctorate and then I came to NYU as a professor, I became very fascinated to look at social emotional development among young people. So I'm a developmental, just like you are, I'm a developmental psychologist. So I study the same kids over many, many years. So after studying, I began to do longitudinal studies of social emotional development from about 12 till about 18 and 19. So you follow the same kids over many years. And my methods are always mixed methods. So it's interviews and surveys and different kinds of things, different kinds of methods. But what I heard in the narrative, and this is coming more rapidly to the present, so I've been at NYU since 1995, is I began to hear a story from the boys about their friendships, that when they were 12, 13, 14, 15, a lot of discussion about wanting friendships or having close friendships or not being able to live without them, and the sense of either wanting them or having them. And then as boys get older, the theme that became obvious to me is that boys started to, their tone of voice changed, their language changed, they became more defensive, more sort of, it doesn't matter, whatever. They started saying that they didn't have the friendships they used to have, or they've never found the friendships that they've wanted. And they, a sense of going sort of underground with their desire for male friendships, and claiming that they didn't need those anymore, or it didn't matter anymore, even though it was very clear in many of the boys seemed very openly depressed and isolated, and talk about their isolation. And so I saw, as boys got older, you saw this loss happening with their friendships. And you also heard something else, which is an important part of the story, an increased reliance on the phrase, which still exists, in case anyone wondering, the homophobic phrase, no homo. So while friendships were not about homosexuality at 12 and 13 and 14, all of a sudden at 15 and 16, they began to equate having close friendships with being gay. And so boys, in their sort of attempt to not appear girly and gay, they basically started to distance themselves from their desire. And so you not only heard this loss, but you heard the reason for the loss, which is essentially a big part of what I do, which is looking at the cultural norms and how our cultural norms actually, Erin, get in the way of healthy development. So we actually have a set of norms and expectations in our culture, particularly around masculinity, that actually get in the way of healthy development. So it's not just that they're sort of toxic, but actually that they're literally getting in the way of healthy human development by making it seem as if only certain type of people need friendships, or certain type of people need emotional intimacy, when that's just a human thing. So what has been framed as girly or, you know, gay is actually just human. It's a human desire for closeness. And the boys sort of taught me that. And then the book, I wrote a book about it. It's called Deep Secrets, Boys' Friendships and the Crisis of Connection. That book came out in 2011. And I was inundated with media around it. I was on the Today Show. I was on the Today Show many times, actually. I was on CNN and lots of fancy places, and the New Yorker. And people were fascinated by this story of boys not only wanting friendships, but then losing friendships as they get older as a result of our cultural norms of masculinity. But what's interesting, Erin, that I'd like to actually talk about is I'm still the only one telling this story. So even though I, the book came out in 2011, then there was a movie that came out that was Oscar nominated this year, that was a movie based on that story. So it was a movie called Close by Lucas Dont, the director and screenwriter. And it tells the same story. It tells the story of boys, 13-year-old boys, two boys who begin to separate, disconnect from each other as they get older. And there's serious consequences to that, that disconnection for the boys. I won't give away the movie, but it's the same story as in my movie, but I'm in my book. But the point is still now 2023. I've been doing this work for a long time, Erin. In terms of research, I'm really the only one telling that story, particularly during adolescence, for boys, about friendships. And Close at this point is the only other version of the story out there. So it's really Close, Lucas's film, and my book that are telling the story. But we are getting, it was Oscar nominated. We are getting inundated with people around the world saying, you're telling my story. This is my story. This is my son's story. This is my husband's story. I get emails. I continue to get emails. You remember the book came out over 10 years ago. I continue to get emails from people around the world. I get journalists interested all the time. I'm constantly being interviewed by mainstream media on the issue. And I'm just fascinated by, in some ways, I obviously hit a nerve in the culture that gave a lot of attention to it. But people are still asking me the same question. Why do we have this? Why don't we value it? Even though I've been saying this sort of loudly for over a decade, even when the movie came out, people were sort of surprised at how much they connected with the movie. So I just think there's something interesting about the cultural story here of how firmly entrenched we get into a certain notion about who we are based on our cultural expectations and definitions of what it means to be girly and gay, for example. And then we don't change, even when we have the data to counter it.
So
Yeah, so I just wanted to put that out there because I think it's something very interesting as parents to think about how much we're aligned with those cultural norms and resistant to change too. You know what I mean? It's not just people out there, it's actually parents too.
that's just what I was thinking. So, what is your message to parents
Yeah,
of adolescents, or your middle childhood adolescents in general?
yeah,
And is that message different to parents of boys versus girls? Is sort of the
yeah,
first part of my question. And then the second part of my question is, the elephant in the room, social media, right? That's
yeah,
sort of come more to the forefront, I would say, probably right in the 11 years
yeah,
since it came out. What do you see the role of all that too in this perpetuation or not
yeah.
of gender norms around relationships?
Well, so basically, to respond to the girl boy thing, no, there's no difference in the sense of what parents should be doing. Because I mean, ultimately, we are a culture that doesn't value friendships. Number one, we value it more for girls than for boys, certainly, but we don't value friendships, especially after late childhood. We think they should be focusing on their schoolwork and they should be doing things that help them get into college and all sorts of things. We don't actually value their friendships as helping them actually do the things they need to do to get into college or whatever, do well in school. There's lots of research showing cognitive development is heavily linked to social emotional well-being. But so we don't value friendships. We definitely don't value it for our sons, but I would say we don't value it. So when Harvard University did a study on parents across the United States, and they found something like 70% of parents said that academic achievement is more important than kindness. And if you live in a culture where parents are thinking that academic achievement is more important than kindness, I would argue you're in trouble. And so basically, boys definitely get it worse than girls, that sort of expectation to value only the hard sides of themselves and not the soft sides. But we're basically a culture that is a hyper-masculine culture. We value the hard parts of ourselves, independence, stoicism, achievement, STEM over humanities and arts. What we call the hard sciences over the so-called soft sciences or the soft fields. So we are a modern sort of hard, in quotation marks, culture. And we do it especially with our boys and our sons and our male partners too. But we also do it with everybody, regardless of your gender identity. We value that hard side over the soft side, and evidence is everywhere. I mean, we give lots of STEM opportunities for girls, but we do not encourage boys to go into arts and humanities. I mean, you don't see that same switch. You don't see people valuing our gorgeous natural relational intelligence that we're born with, our sense of wonder about who you are, Erin, and what I can learn about myself through listening to you, that beautiful 5-year-old curiosity that we're all born with. We don't even value it. We don't even study it in child development. Interpersonal curiosity is confounded with gossip. It has nothing to do with gossip. But we confound it and we don't value it. We don't nurture it, but it's the essential skill to form connection. So I would say, as parents, to answer your question, it's not only valuing friendships and really seeing them as what young people have been asking us to value for over a century, that we need to value their friendships actually more than anything else, because their friendships are key to their mental health. But it's also valuing those gorgeous emotional social skills we are born with, Erin, right now, that you can read my emotion, that I know you're listening in the way you're, even though we're on Zoom, I can tell you, right, the way you're responding to me, I can tell you're listening to me. I mean, there's all sorts of ways that we come in with these beautiful skills and we don't value them. So people who are relationally intelligent is somehow seen as lesser than being really good in astrophysics. And so at some level, it's really valuing the soft sides of ourselves as well as the hard sides. And by hard, I'm always putting in quotations because I don't literally mean hard. I mean what we've made hard, what we've made soft, and valuing both sides of our humanity, the yin and the yang in many ways, of our humanity that parents need to do with both their sons and their daughters, not just with their sons, of course, obviously with their sons, but also with their daughters, valuing their daughters' emotional skills and relational skills.
So I think you brought up like a really interesting point, just
Yeah,
thinking of this almost, somewhat less as a researcher and more the mom of two girls,
yeah.
is when we confound interpersonal curiosity and gossip.
Isn't that incredible, Erin?
It is.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how you foster genuine interpersonal curiosity in your children,
Yeah,
and not this, gossip girl sort
yeah.
of
Well,
mentality?
first of all, I want to make it very clear that it's totally different, entirely different things. And the fact that we collapse them is because we feminize interpersonal curiosity and we don't like feminine things. So we turn it into the nasty thing of gossip. Gossip is sharing information, oftentimes harmful information that hasn't necessarily been validated, et cetera. And it's the so-called sort of, people's pleasure in sharing information about other people. That is not interpersonal curiosity. Interpersonal curiosity, I'll give you an example of it, because all you have to do is listen to a 5-year-old. So, a 5-year-old boy says to his mom, who's going through a divorce, and she comes home from work, and she says, "Mommy, why do you smile when you're feeling sad?" So literally asking the question of why do you fake an emotion? That's interpersonal curiosity. Another one, a 5-year-old boy says to his mom, "Mommy, are you yelling at me because your mommy yelled at you?" So we come into the world with amazing curiosity about, why are you sad? Mommy, why do you, daddy? All these beautiful questions that our 5-year-olds ask, and we don't value it. Every mother I've ever spoken to has a story when their child was 5, including their sons, about that gorgeous, who are you? Why is that? Why do we do this? Why do you do this? And that's what I mean by interpersonal curiosity, really learning about the world and about each other through asking questions. And when you listen to the way we listen to each other, we do parallel play. We don't listen to each other. We each talk, or sometimes only one person talks, and then we sort of move on with our day. I teach this method. I call it the listening project. I teach it in schools around the world, and as well as at NYU. And it's really nurturing that ability to say, not only ask a question, but actually the art of follow-up questions. What do you mean? Tell me about exactly what you mean. Tell me a story about that. Then why did you do that? Then what happened to this? Those are the questions that people are starving for you to ask, because those are the questions that make people feel seen and heard. And in our research, we do that, our method in schools and middle and high schools across New York City. And when we do that, students report and teachers report that they feel listened to when someone does that, when someone doesn't just say, some initial question and then just go on to the next question. But we don't do it. And we've lost our 5-year-old curiosity, so that when I train in the classroom, students learning something like open-ended questions, which is fascinating. Open-ended questions is something, it's not a yes or no question. It's asking, tell me about your relationship with your mother, rather than are you close to your mother? And it's amazing how much my students will just constantly ask close-ended questions, because they're looking for confirmation rather than actually learning something from another person about their experiences, that they can then also learn something about themselves. So, but since it's natural, Erin, it's easy to bring back, because it's what we're born with. So it's really, once you begin to learn the method, everybody says it transforms their life. And parents can do it with kids. Parents can do it with each other. Kids can do it with each other. It's a very natural human skill, and it builds relationships.
So how do you think that plays in? So I'm a mom of a teenage girl, right? And
Yeah.
there's that Instagram, TikTok, like the very quick, right?
It's social media. Yeah. Well, basically, it's a good question, because I'm trying at the moment. We'll see if it works, but I'm trying to work, I'm in conversation with people at TikTok, because ultimately social media is just a me media. It's not a social media. And it's a me media, not because it's social media's fault, it's because we are a me culture. So in a culture that is a me culture creates social media that's me media, not social media. We think connection is just sharing something vulnerable about myself to you. That doesn't form connection. When I just share something vulnerable with you and you just share then something vulnerable with me, we do not feel connected. We might feel more connected than not sharing that, but that's not how we connect. So it's not just dumping our stuff to another person. That's not connection. Connection is actually me being curious about you, and we don't nurture that in social media. We could easily do it. Influencers, I'll say this right now on your podcast because I'm trying to get TikTok to do this. Influencers could be actually mutually interviewing their best friend, their mom, their dad, their cousin, followers, whatever, where the interview goes both back and forth. So it's not just one person interviewing the other person, but the other person then asking the same questions and interviewing the other person back. We call it transformative interviewing, where they basically are really engaged and modeling that how to come to know each other, right? How to create connection through really being curious about each other and about what you can learn about each other. Not just Erin, that you grew up wherever you grew up or et cetera, but actually asking you questions. These are the questions that young people want to be asked, that they aren't asked. A time in which you felt listened to, a time in which you felt safe, a time in which, where is home for you? How would, what does home mean to you? A time, what does close mean to you? What does it mean to feel close? What does love feel like? What does it mean to feel, to feel love for someone? These are the questions that young people, when you ask them what questions they want to be asked by other people, including their moms, by the way, these are the questions they want to be asked. They want to be asked meaningful questions. But yet I spent 4 years with my daughter asking her, did she do her homework? Seriously, I think I can be so self-critical because I literally asked her for 4 years, did you do your homework? And that was essentially the only question I was asking her for 4 years. And so the whole sense of how much parents can actually ask meaningful questions. Tell me about a time, honey, that you felt listened to. Tell me about that. I want to hear about a time in which you really felt listened to, someone really saw you. Like, how often do we ask our kids that? Never.
So my question then is, okay, so let's say we're where we're at, right?
Yeah.
So how do we shift that? Because I think sometimes for kids, right, if they're used to us asking these closed-ended questions, and then all of a sudden we're like asking them when they felt heard, they're like, what's wrong? What's going on? This feels different. How do you, sort of introduce that? And then how do you, I think break through the barrier is probably the wrong way to put it. But, if you kind of come up against it's fine. I don't know. I've been hurt a lot of times. I'm just thinking.
Yeah. Well, we have a website called friendship.love. And on the website, we're just developing it and people can get on it if they want. And the question is, ask your daughter or your son or your best friend the question that they wish someone would ask them. So they get to decide the question and just say, we're going to play a game and you get I want to know what question you wished I would ask you. And then I'm going to tell you the question I wish you would ask me. And then, so the very first exchange should be, what's the question you want to be asked? We asked 300 college students the questions they want to be asked. 70 to 80% of them were questions about wanting to be asked questions that would allow you to see them as they see themselves, rather than as you stereotype them to be. So 80% of the questions were things like, I want my mom or my dad or my best friend to ask me about the things that I really value, the things that I really think about, the things, things that I can actually reveal to them how I see myself. So to me, an open-ended, it was amazing to me how starving people are for someone to ask the question they want to be asked. And so I think the question is going to be different, right? If you ask the question versus their best friend, but that's fine. That's fine. And I just think also get them to ask you the question. Curiosity should go both ways. What question would you love your daughter to ask you? What question how would you like to be seen by your daughter that perhaps you don't feel seen? And I think, sometimes we as parents, when I say we, I'm always talking as parents. I'm the mother of 2 kids, 23 23 and 20, almost 21. And I think we oftentimes think there's going to be barriers, but when you make it about questions and the questions they want to be asked, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised how much that opens up a space. So you're not choosing the question and then saying, answer it, right? You're basically allowing them to control the conversation. I just think it's easier than we think it is. Now, will they tell you their deepest secrets? Probably not. But I don't think real communication has to be deep secrets. I mean, it could literally be, why do you like that TikTok? Why do you follow that person? I'm really curious on what you find interesting about that influencer. And they may say, well, I don't want to tell you because you're going to judge me. And the reality is you have to really go in with a curiosity, like, well, I'm curious though. I won't judge. I'm really curious. And it could be something like, I'm going to make it up because I have a teenage girl too. I did. She's 20 now, but her answer may be not what you want to hear, but then that's not genuine curiosity. I mean, like, it may be something like, I think she's really beautiful. And I love it when listening to her talk because she's just really beautiful and I want to be like her. I think that's totally fascinating. Why do you find her beautiful? Tell me about what makes her beautiful to you. What is it about her voice that you like to hear her talk, about whatever it is she's talking about. So take a real curiosity rather than a judgment of like, well, that's a stupid reason to follow someone.
I have to say, Niobe, like, I think we did a podcast, almost 8-9 months ago, and you said that. And
did I really say that before?
You did. And I walked the walk though with my 14-year-old, because
what happened?
I was like, I just don't understand the TikTok videos. And instead, so she used to be, I'd be like, oh, who is that? She's like, you don't know her, Mom. And why are you being so judgy in your tone? Like, I didn't even realize I was being judgy, but yeah, she was right. I was kind of like, oh,
No, I mean, of course. Yeah.
But instead I was like, oh, why are you so interested in her account? Like, what do you, and I almost felt bad after, like, she told me, because I was like, I was very judgy. And she's like, I really like that she thought about dropping out of college and took a year, I'm like, oh, I don't necessarily want you to follow that, right?
Like, no. Yeah.
Really conversation. And
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So you answered your own question. Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, but that's very gratifying, Erin. Thank you for sharing that, because it's very gratifying. I mean, I just know this as a parent. I just know it. We make things more complicated than they are. And I also think our expectations should be modulated. So, my son is less forthcoming than my daughter. So my expectations for my son is, I can definitely ask him questions around what he's doing and, various things that he really enjoys. There's certain questions that he would say, I don't want to answer that. Like, I'm not going to answer to that question. That's okay. I mean, basically realizing that our kids set boundaries, and that's important for them to set boundaries of what they feel like sharing with you and what they don't. And I've now come to really love that I can get into conversations with my son about things that are very meaningful to him, but I wouldn't necessarily call them personal, but they're very meaningful to him. So we talk about those kinds of things, you know what I mean? So it creates a connection that's very him, because he's not the type that sort of deeply reflects, or he does deeply reflect on feelings, but he's not the type to process things in the way my daughter does. So it's just a different type of conversation. And I think moms, also, I'm going to speak as a mom. I think sometimes moms, especially if you have a son and a daughter, you sort of want similar things or something. You want the intimacy with your son that you have with your daughter, or vice versa. Or if you have two kids, even, you want the same thing with each kid. And I think sometimes it's recognizing that each relationship is going to be totally different. And so you know what I mean? So the questions are going to be different. And even talking about, when Rafi plays soccer, for example, and he's just played a game, he loves to unpack what he thinks he did well in the soccer game. You know what I mean? Like how he played well, or when he messed up. So he likes to go through a play, in terms of what happened. And I love hearing that, because it's like, that's Right, that's what's important to him. That's what he's thinking about.
Yeah.
And to him, that's actually what he's thinking about. Right. So, and I'm not trying, I mean, we have meaningful conversations too, not just about sports. I'm not being cliche, but I'm just saying, picking something that I would have thought was superficial, and just realizing, but it's not for him. It's like a real thing that is important to him. You know what I mean?
Totally. And, I was just thinking, sort of as the developmental psychologist in both of us, like,
Yeah.
talk so much about child-directed play
Yeah.
and letting, your child take the initiative when they're young. And
Yeah.
then
That's
at
right.
in my experience, it's been like once they hit middle childhood, all of a sudden it's almost like, okay, the child-directed thing is gone. Now it's all about like the parents, like
Yeah.
all because of this, I would say somewhat achievement drive, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that you make the right decision,
Yeah.
the right college. And
Yeah.
there's like shift that happens
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
we're all about what they're interested in,
Yeah.
regardless of, whatever, whether it's going to move them quote unquote forward or not.
Yeah.
Till
Yeah.
like, oh, did you, are you going to do Latin in high school or not? Because if you do Latin in high school, maybe that's a
I know.
good thing. And,
No, I spent so many years with both kids having those conversations, and it's not that those are irrelevant or they're not important. It's important to sort of help them think through choices that they're making. But I do think, I just didn't, I honestly, I've spent my career studying friendships and the importance of friendships. I did not value my children's friendships when they were teenagers. I mean, I just didn't. I was so anxious about making sure they were checking off the right boxes so that they would do well in high school and be able to get into a good college, et cetera. It was just pathetic. It was pathetic. And so I really think at some level, I didn't really believe the importance of friendships until COVID happened, of course, but both of my kids in different ways, really struggled, and their friendships are just their worlds. They are their friendships. I mean, that's where both of their psyches, my son's a sort of science person, my daughter's more of a humanities person. They're both equally dedicated to their friends. And so I just really feel like parents have to really, really believe that those relationships, I would even argue, I'm going to say something very controversial, that as you get into late adolescence, et cetera, certainly early adolescence, but even late adolescence, they're the most important relationships. I mean, more so than, any other relationship, they're the most important relationships, because that is really where they're building their values and their sense of self-esteem and their sense of worth and their understanding of the world and their understanding of, how the world of relationships works, how to get through conflict, learning how to get through difficult situations. I mean, and I just feel like a world that doesn't call people who don't have a romantic partner single would be the world that would be a healthy world. I mean, the fact that we call people single without a romantic partner reflects our total lack of value of friendships. Nobody is single. Nobody is single. There's not such a thing as a single person, because everybody has other people in their lives. Even people who are more isolated, almost always they have other people in their lives. So stop calling each other single if you don't have a romantic partner. I mean, it's just, we're not. And it feels very pathologizing for people who have to announce their romantic status all the time. So, I mean, it's, so I really think we've created a culture where we put all our emotional eggs into one romantic basket. And that's killing us. I mean, it's just killing us, because it's not, and then most romantic relationships actually are not very healthy. So, I mean, they're not necessarily mutually supportive. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on in between two people trying to have a, intimate, sexual, romantic relationship. And friendships, can last a lifetime.
I'm thinking like, because all of this is so important, right? And
Yeah.
so the CDC came out with this report, right, about girls, and it definitely like hit a chord for me as the mom of two girls, that
Yeah,
all these metrics, right?
yeah,
Teenage girls were not doing so great.
yeah.
I'm just curious to hear your thoughts because I'm a part of me, like the researcher in me is also like, well, is it like how the, teenagers felt comfortable responding? Did boys just respond differently because and girls respond differently because that's what they kind of thought was expected of them?
Yeah.
Is there some of that going on? But that aside, like, we've made some steps forward, right? But like,
Mm.
I think, yeah.
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I mean, I think in some ways we're going backwards. I mean, the data suggests it's very obvious. Girls are more likely to attempt suicide. Boys are more likely to commit suicide. So that's been true in the data for decades. And boys are much more likely to, I mean, significantly more likely to commit suicide than girls and women, boys and men. Middle-aged men are the most likely to commit suicide. But girls are more likely to attempt suicide. They're also more likely to cut themselves or starve themselves, be in violent relationships with boys, and boys are more likely to kill people than girls. So, basically we're all suffering. We're all massively suffering. Boys are more likely to suffer in a violent way, and girls are more likely to be the victims of violence. Although apparently boys are actually more likely to be the victims of violence, but girls are victims of violence, what is it? Every 30 seconds, someone's raped, or horrible statistics. So we're all suffering. And I really go back to, we're born social and emotionally intelligent. We're born as social animals, and we grow up in a culture that doesn't value our social emotional capacities and doesn't nurture it. So we really shouldn't be surprised at all that we're all suffering, because if you don't value half of our humanity, our soft side, it's half, and it's necessary to make those connections with self and others. You're going to have kids freak out, whether it's committing suicide, cutting themselves, killing other people, mass shooters. I'm just finishing a book called, just writing a book that I just finished it, called Rebels with a Cause, Reimagining Boys, Ourselves, and Our Culture. And in it, there's a piece on the mass shooters. And I've been reading the manifestos of mass shooters. And they're the same story, except in more extreme versions as Deep Secrets. I mean, they're clearly boys with mental health issues. But the question we never ask is, why do they have mental health issues? Not that they have mental health, they have mental health issues, but that's not the reason they're killing, because mental illness does not lead you to kill. Basically mental health is a symptom of the problem, not the problem. The problem is really a culture that is that clashes with our nature, and then creates a crisis of connection. And that crisis of connection, where we're disconnected from ourselves and each other, because half of our humanity is basically told to go underneath and, to be covered over, creates, for boys, it creates violence. And for girls, it often creates self-directed violence. So I just think we have to get out of sort of the conversation of who's suffering more. And we're all suffering to different degrees. But it really is a whole entire culture that fundamentally doesn't value what we most need and want as humans. And the reason I know it's a cultural problem is I've lived in lots of different cultures that are much less hard than the United States. The United States I was born in Paris. I spent lots of time in lots of different countries in the Middle East and China. My ex-husband is German. And all of those cultures have, really do have the valuing of a kind of humanities, poetry, the soft sides of our humanity, a kind of physical affection that you see a lot especially in rural China and rural areas of the world, the close family connections, the physicality between men you see in most of the world. It's not considered gay in most of the world to be physically connected to other men through touch, etc. But it is in the United States. So, we have a particular kind of homophobia in this country that creates the problem. So I would just say we have to get out of that it's an individual problem, or it's a boy problem, or it's a girl problem. It's a cultural problem. It's a cultural problem. And the solution is to change the culture by engaging in our natural capacity to actually connect and really valuing it, you know?
So I totally agree.
Yeah.
But like thinking about it on a more sort of, I guess, micro level, you know,
Yeah.
as parents, what
Yeah,
can
totally.
we
We
do,
set the culture. We
right?
set the, we perpetuate the culture. Yeah, no, that's why I'm saying parents are the most important, because we perpetuate the culture. So we have to model a different culture. We have to model it. We have to do it. Just like
Being
you did.
very like concrete about it. Let's,
Yeah.
how do you
We
model
have to,
it
yeah,
with a preschooler to a high
yeah,
schooler?
yeah.
What are some ways?
The discussion of friendships has to be brought into the home early on. If your kids are now, they're teenagers or young adults, start now. The discussion of friendships, talking about what we know about the importance of friendships, how they're linked to our physical health, our mental health. We live longer lives when we have close friends. Cancer doesn't metastasize as much as when we have close friends. We literally, they do studies where you scrape someone's hand. People with more connected friendships heal quicker than people who are more isolated. Our body, our immune system responds to the extent to which we feel connected to others. Friendships are key to our physical well-being and our mental well-being. And we just have to talk about it. We have to talk about what we know about friendships, how difficult it is to have friendships. Talk about our own friendships. Talk about friendships take as much work as a romantic relationship. They betray you. How do you work through a betrayal? You model it by talking about your own friendships, about talking about your own struggles with friends. I struggle with all sorts of issues of being a middle-aged woman trying to maintain a set of close friendships when my friends' kids are younger than my kids, for example. So they're more consumed with things I've grown over. You know, I mean, I'm now no longer dealing with. That makes me feel at times less connected to them. Because I feel like I can't relate to your struggles now, and they also have less time, of course, than I have with both kids in college at this point. So but I'm open with this, sort of sharing it with my kids. Not necessarily that they're always interested, but they hear me processing things. I oftentimes ask their advice at this point. I even asked them when they were teenagers. I'd say, you know, so-and-so didn't return my text. It made me feel super bad because I texted her like 3 times and she hasn't responded. What do you think I should do? And I oftentimes did that with my son and my daughter. And they would oftentimes say, well, I think what you should do is, you know, but that's helping them sort of think through that friendships matter. The other thing is notice when they're being socially and emotionally astute. Like my son came in I remember when he was 15, and he's very stereotypic in many ways, sports player, identified with sports, science is his focus. And he came in once, I love this story. He's 15, you have to imagine he's wearing his sports jersey, I don't know, some soccer team. And he comes in, he says, Mom. And I'm like, what? He goes, I think I know why you get picked on the most in your family. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, why? And he goes, because they think that you can deal with it the most. They think you can deal with it. They think you're the least sort of fragile in the family. And I was like, Raphael, oh my God, that's incredible. And he goes, yeah, that's what I think. You know, and I made such a big deal. I mean, he'd never had sort of shared an insight like that with me. And I was like, that was so helpful, Raphael. Like, that's so spot on. That is so spot on. If I wasn't aware of it, I would have said, oh yeah, I think you're right. And I would have that's it. But because I sort of gave him basically positive feedback for having this amazing insight, he sort of, I could feel him afterwards sort of thinking about other insights, because it obviously felt good for me to say, wow, that was super helpful. Like that. So recognizing in our children when they say amazing things, like they notice things and they say it, and saying to them, wow, that's super interesting. Like, why do you think that? You know?
I think it's sometimes a shift in our thinking, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like when your child brings up something, I mean, my teenager will do this to me a lot,
Yeah.
right? Where I'm like, ooh, it stings a little bit because you're totally right and you're
Yeah.
totally being insightful. And instead of
Yeah.
like backing away from that, like
Yeah.
embracing it, and learn
Totally.
from them, right? Rather
Totally,
than,
totally. Yeah, yeah, I'd say, and it's funny because my daughter has also said some things to me that feel a little stingy. I mean, not, she doesn't do it in a mean way at all, but she's doing it as a sort of, I noticed, Mom, you do this. And I actually think it's hard to do, but I actually think it's totally great to say, well, tell me more. Tell me why you think, that's interesting. I mean, just take them seriously as someone who you can learn from socially, emotionally, because quite frankly, young people are oftentimes more connected socially, emotionally than we are, because we're so defended for so many different reasons, especially as women, I would say. So I just think that whole sense of taking your children seriously from day one, of what you can learn from them, not just what you can learn, what you can teach them, but what you can learn from your 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, son included. And so I would say, regardless of what your children's ages are now, it's all relevant. It's switch the relationship between what you can teach your children to what you can learn from your children, not in a sort of, let's make it so that they're the teacher and you're the child. No. You will continue to teach them stuff. But especially as they grow older, if you're starting to learn from them, that will be enhanced in them, that they are competent as someone who can read the social emotional world in beautiful ways, and they will use that in their friendships and in their relationships. So you're giving them a gift by saying, oh, honey, that's interesting. Tell me more why you think that. That's actually giving them a gift, because, right, it's a total gift. So I would say, honestly, the reason why I wanted to be on this podcast, besides I adore you, Erin, is that parents are everything, because we are the ones raising the children. I mean, grandparents, whoever's raising the children, I don't want to be parent biased, but whoever is raising the kids, we are setting the future generation. So what we do gets carried forth. So I would say it is entirely on the shoulders of parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles who are raising the next generation, older brothers and sisters, right? To model the kind of culture we want. And we can totally do it, because it's what we want too, Erin. We do. You know what I mean?
I think there's an enjoyment in it too,
Yeah.
right? It's getting over that, I don't know, anxiety, feeling like you have to be the perfect parent and like impart all this knowledge that will then they forward, but enjoying their comments, their insights. I always laugh, like my 3-year-old will be, she can spot on say, like, she's like, why are you mad, mommy? And my first instinct is to be like, what are you talking about?
No, exactly. No, it's completely. We do that all the time. Like, no, I'm not, and no, exactly. And just being, and I'm not saying, in case parents are thinking I'm saying this, I'm not saying sharing all your intimate thoughts with your children. I'm not saying that, because obviously there's boundaries, and I've never shared my intimate thoughts with my children around, relationships or whatever. But I have shared challenges, I've shared reflections, I've allowed them, more recently, I had to learn this, just like you, Erin, allowing them to reflect about things that they've noticed in me. And also I will reflect to them, of course, and want to get their feedback. So it goes both ways. And that's because they're older now. So I'm not doing some crazy parenting where the kids are in charge and we're now like sort of infantile, you know what I mean? I'm doing the sense of taking your 3-year-old seriously, not to say you're going to sit down and now share with your 3-year-old about why you're mad, but you're going to say, right? But you're going to say, I'm making this up, Erin, but I'll model it. Something happened at work today and somebody said something that really made me upset. So I think I'm just holding on to that. Has that ever happened to you? Like someone does something at school and it sort of makes you mad and you hold on to it. And then my guess is even your 3-year-old will say something, or maybe it has to be more 4 and 5, but they'll resonate with it. They'll want to share their own. Yeah. Someone made me mad in school today too. Right. And so you're not getting into the details of, it's just be inappropriate. But you're sharing the emotion that's obviously they can relate to. And so I just think, I'm also just stunned by the level of insight of people between 5 and 10. I'm just stunned by it. I mean,
I'm gonna go down. I'm gonna say 2 to, I'm gonna go down and up.
yeah, okay, let's go down. Okay. No, fair enough, because actually I don't have enough exposure these days to 0 to 5. But okay, I would say 2 to 10, 2 to 10. And teenagers are brilliant too. But there's a way in which the truth-telling voice of that 2 to 10-year-old is astounding to me. And I just call them truth tellers. They're truth tellers. I mean, even the thing, I have a mole under my eye, and I always get little kids on airplanes when I'm sitting next to them. Why do you have a mole under your eye? And the parent always reprimands them and says, that's rude. Don't ask that question. And it's like a great question. Like, why do we have brown spots on our faces? You know, why do we have that? Why is it under my eye, actually? You know what I mean? And so I just like, even when it's not a profound question, it's like a question about why do you have a mole on your face? It's an important, it's an interesting question, actually. You know, I mean, why do our faces look like they look like, you know, I mean, why are your eyes a certain color, whatever it is? So I just think valuing that gorgeous curiosity, truth-telling capacity, and engaging with it, and you will raise incredibly healthy children, because that will be their way of, you know, interacting in the world, is by asking questions and being taken seriously. And especially, I would say, Erin, and because you're the mother of 2 daughters, taking our daughters as seriously as our sons. So, right, taking the thoughts and feelings of our sons, certainly important, which there's a lot of emphasis right now, but taking the thoughts and feelings of our daughters equally important. You know, the fact that my daughter comes home, she used to, no longer, come home with a different sort of fight with different girlfriends would make me irritated at sometimes, like, oh, she's another fight with another girlfriend. How obnoxious of me. You know, she was struggling with these fights with her girlfriend that were really distressing her. And I would communicate to her like, oh, you know, I'm cooking now. I can't deal with this. I hope it gets better. I mean, I wasn't willing to sort of process it with her, because it just seemed like so much all the time. But I think that's a way of not taking our daughters seriously, you know, like not treating them as sensitive, beautiful humans that need to process, and they may need to process more than our sons. I don't think necessarily, I'm not making a gender stereotype, but I'm saying if that's the case, that's okay. That's okay.
And that's why I've also like learned from you in our conversations, because I think, yeah, there is that tendency. Even tonight at dinner, my older one was, you know, talking about this teacher that she had an issue with, and this friend that she had an issue with, right? And a little part of me was just like,
yeah, I know. No, and you're exhausted, and you're about to do this podcast. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
But I was like, wait, let me ask her a few follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And it all came out, right? Like it was all related, the issues with her friends and the teacher. It came down to not being heard, right? It was just
exactly. No, and I think because I oftentimes focus on boys, and I think I really want to focus more on, I'm really talking about how we raise our kids, regardless of their gender identity, and including non-gender conforming kids too. Is that whole notion that when we communicate to your daughter, when you communicate to your daughter, I do with my daughter too, that basically you're being slightly irritating when you're processing your feelings. What a horrible message. Right. And so I don't mean to beat both of us up, but I just think I'm not doing that, because we do the best we can as mothers. But I do think we actually will grow closer to our children if we don't communicate that their emotions are irritating, or for our sons that their emotions are embarrassing, or that they're not right, or that somehow they're inappropriate or immature. And so it really is, Erin, I hate to say this again, but I'm just going to say it because I'm hoping you're getting a lot of parents listening. It really does come down to the people who raise the kids. I mean, to create the different culture. That's really it.
And I think too, for parents, like being uncomfortable, right? Because especially the way I think, not to generalize, but our generation was raised, especially in the
Yeah,
States, kind of
yeah,
like there was somewhat like unspoken barrier, right? Like
yeah,
you don't talk to your parents about this or
yeah,
that. They don't want to hear about it. So
yeah,
it's like becoming more comfortable.
yeah,
I'm speaking for myself here, but like in hearing some of these like uncomfortable things that our children are going through and like
yeah,
sitting there and not
yeah,
trying to
yeah,
not trying to
yeah.
pass judgment on the other kid that was involved in the disagreement, but just like sitting there with them.
No, no, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I just think it's interesting. If so, for another podcast, we can think about why it's so irritating. I think in some ways it's partly a reflection of our own discomfort, but I also think, you know, I also think there's a part of it that I worry about my daughter when she, I worry I don't, it makes me terribly pain when my children feel pain, as most parents feel. And so part of it is that I also don't want to hear that my children are suffering. And so I don't want to hear it.
Totally.
Um, so part of it is recognizing, oh, that's what's being triggered for me, is I don't want to sit there and then worry that my daughter's, something's happening that's making her feel really bad about herself or whatever it is. Um, and the same with my son. My son has said a couple things that are pretty deep, intense things about when he was in high school, about his own suffering. And I realized my reaction was like, shut it down, just because I just didn't, I
It
was
hurt.
so, yeah, I didn't want to feel the pain I would feel to see my children being in pain. So I think it's allowing us to have, to be more comfortable with that. And to also recognize, this is a funny thing, I'm going to say this because I have older kids, also realizing that tomorrow it will probably be better. Like the fluctuations. I mean, not always, but oftentimes the fluctuations are a lot as they're growing up. But yeah, but also for those parents whose kids don't share with them, I don't want parents like that to feel bad. I think I honestly think it's about getting to know the kid, and if you have a kid who doesn't process things, that's great. I mean, that's fine. And then you figure out what him or her or they want to process with you, or want to discuss with you, or maybe it's just a movie, or maybe it's a video they watched, or maybe it's whatever they enjoy doing and they want to process that. And I think just allowing it to be whatever is right for your relationship. So there's no pressure for parents that say, well, because I get that a lot. People will say, well, my son never talks to me. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, what kind of talk do you mean? Like, well, they never share, what's really going on. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't think you have to expect that as a parent. In fact, I think it's unfair to the kid to expect that.
That's a good
It really is. I
one.
mean, there's no reason why a kid should feel like they have to share their intimate thoughts with their folks. And I say that because I had a daughter who did and a son who didn't. And it's, I feel just as close to both, but it took a while for me to become close to my son in ways that he felt comfortable with, not sort of always asking him, how are you really feeling? And he'd say, I'm fine, Mom, I'm totally fine. And then it would feel irritating. But he's not a processor in that way. You know what I mean? He's not a processor that way. And that's totally fine. And I'm his mom. And, there's going to be things that he's not going to want to process with me. So I just think also reminding parents that they have to be kind to themselves. We
Yeah,
try the best we can. We try the
definitely.
best we can, I mean,
And
there's a lot of pressure on us, and I would say especially for moms. But I do think we try a lot. And I think the only thing we could do probably a little bit better at is switching from the judgment to the curiosity. Would be the one skill I would urge all parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles to consider with the young people that are in their lives.
I love that. And I think that's a lovely way to sort of end our hour together because it's so important. I know everyone's going to want to know sort of where to find out more about what you've written and, sort of your your social media presence as well. So can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I never remember anything. But I am on Instagram and I am on Facebook and I am on Twitter. And if you just say Niobe Way, you'll find me because I'm the only Niobe Way that exists. And my book is Deep Secrets and the Boys' Friendships and the Crisis of Connection, but I've written a lot of books about boys and also about the crisis of connection. And my newest book will come out in the fall called Rebels with a Cause, Reimagining Boys, Ourselves, and our Culture. And that will be with Dutton Press, which is Penguin Random House. So I think I'll have to come back onto your show when that book comes out.
Definitely. Yeah, well, I always love talking to you. And, for anyone out there who has, questions or comments, you can also email.
Yeah, just email me. Yeah, but you can also just email me. I'm at NYU. I mean, the advantage of having a name that's so unusual is you can find me on email easily. So yeah, just with questions, people should feel free to email me.
Well, thank you so much for chatting tonight. And you can also find more information on beta.cooper.com and your_Cooper on Instagram. I'm not the only Erin O'Connor out there in the world, so it's easier to find me that way probably than other ways. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you, Niobe.
Thank you, Erin. Bye. Good night.
Bye, everyone. Good night.